Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today to participate in this PSLF workshop about how to successfully get loan forgiveness through the Federal Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. My name is Amanda Prasuhn, and I am the Director of Public Interest Financial Support at Berkeley Law. And then on the call with us today, we also have Suzanne Martindale, who is the Senior Deputy Commissioner in the Consumer Financial Protection Division at the California Department of Financial Protection and Innovation. It's a very long title. She is also a Berkeley Law alum. She teaches a class on student loan law at Berkeley Law, and she has gotten public service loan forgiveness herself. So we're going to go through this webinar today to kind of review the PSLF basics, and then kind of walk you through like these different steps that'll be really helpful in obtaining PSLF correctly. So like how to review your loans, what forms to fill out, what records to keep. We'll go a little bit into the new PSLF waiver, actually filling out that PSLF application, and then of course like how to navigate errors and disputes, which I think Suzanne will be most well suited to help us with that one, as she's an expert on that. Definitely use the Zoom Q&A function at any time, and we'll hop in there and answer those questions for you. Suzanne, do you have anything you want to say before we get started?
Oh, just very briefly. And we'll explain a little bit later sort of what my department does. But we are, a state financial regulator. We actually license and examine all the loan servicers that carry your loans. So we are an additional resource as well. And we also talk regularly. We meet monthly with the U.S. Department of Education. So along the way, as we go through the presentation, I'll provide some concrete, kind of real world guidance about some of the things that we see and hear from people, and make sure that you know how to use us, our department, your state consumer financial protection agency, as a resource as well. And I'm also happy to answer any questions people have about the lived experience of having gone through it myself, because I know that it's really challenging, but it can be done. It happened to me last summer. So please feel free to use either the chat or the Q&A. We'll monitor both to answer any questions you have on the fly.
Awesome. Thanks, Suzanne. And just jump in anytime you have something to add on to the slides that I've prepared. I'm just going to do a quick review of what PSLF is. Definitely, if you've participated in any of my programs before, this will all sound really familiar, but I know some people are just graduating or are maybe jumping into the idea of forgiveness after a long period of maybe thinking they weren't eligible. So PSLF was created by Congress in 2007 to encourage federal student loan borrowers to go into public service careers. And the main idea is that in exchange for working in qualifying public service employment for 10 years and making payments on your loans during that time, your loans can get fully forgiven tax-free. There are these 4 main requirements that you really have to think about with PSLF. You have to have the right types of loans in the right type of repayment plan. You have to make 120 qualifying payments on those loans, and you have to do this all while working in qualifying employment. Now, some of these requirements have been temporarily waived due to this new PSLF waiver, which is going to expire at the end of October of this year. So we'll talk a little bit about which requirements are actually waived, but these are the main requirements you need to think about and that are going to persist after the PSLF waiver exists. So the types of qualifying loans that qualify for PSLF are direct federal student loans. If you look at your loans and you see direct in front of the name, that's going to qualify for PSLF. Some types of loans that are not going to qualify are if you have a FFEL loan, a Perkins loan, or if you have a private loan managed by a private company. There is a way to actually consolidate your Perkins or FFEL loans if you do want them to qualify for PSLF. You can actually just consolidate them into a direct consolidation loan that's going to qualify. So if you're someone who is a current student or you just graduated, there's no rush on this. Really, you can just do it before you enter repayment as you're exiting that 6-month grace period. But if you're someone who's already in repayment and have already started making payments and you want your Perkins or FFEL loans to qualify, you should consolidate them before October 31st, 2020. That's because of this new PSLF waiver. And then Suzanne, maybe you'll have some advice about this third note, but there is this idea under this limited PSLF waiver that you can perhaps benefit from loan consolidation if you have loans that are sort of have been in repayment for different periods of time, maybe like undergrad loans, and then you worked a little bit and made payments on your loans, and then you went to law school. It's actually under the rules of the waiver, you can consolidate all of those loans together and have the new consolidation loan have the number of PSLF qualifying payments as the underlying loan that's sort of closest to PSLF. So it's an interesting prospect if you maybe have some loans that are way closer to PSLF than others. It could be something you might want to think about. There are definitely downsides to consolidating, like it capitalizes your interest where any unpaid interest you have is added to the principal balance. It can also slightly increase your interest rate. So I think something to consider here. Suzanne, do you have any advice, and like, are you seeing people pursue this option, or is it something people are kind of staying away from?
Yeah, I mean, there's really no good one size fits all answer with issues related to consolidation. I think the consolidation option is a really good one, in particular for people who have been working in public service and thought that was it, that was all you needed to do. People who are committed to continuing working in public service and want to access the benefits of PSLF, now they find out that one or more of their loans was the wrong kind of loan, one of these old FFEL loans, the Federal Family Education Loan Program, which that ended in 2010. So if you're somebody who's been borrowing in the last few years, this will not apply to you. But some of us who borrowed before 2010 ended up with loans of this type, which all of the things being equal typically do not qualify for PSLF. So if you're someone who knows you want to do PSLF full stop, this may be a great option to get credit as all the way back to your oldest loan. Then again, if you have this older loan, but you've mostly paid it off and the interest rate's really low, do you want to loop it in with another loan and have this consolidation loan? It's really a tricky thing. I think you have to really think about the facts and circumstances and about how sure you are that you want to make sure all of your loans are enrolled in PSLF, and that may depend on the balance you have, the interest rate you have, how far along you are toward paying off the old loan. So it is one of those tricky ones where you want to think about the different scenarios before you take the step. But certainly if you have a large loan that has been on the books that you want to get rid of, and you think that you're pretty far along toward 10 years of payments, there could be a real benefit of consolidating it to take advantage of this new waiver that we'll be talking about throughout the course of the presentation today.
Perfect. I think those are all the right things to be considering there. Okay, you have to have these loans that qualify, so direct federal student loans in a qualifying repayment plan. The easiest thing you can do is put those into an income-driven repayment plan. There are definitely multiple types, but they're all going to qualify for PSLF, and they're going to result in typically your payment being lower than it would be under like a standard 10-year repayment plan. The standard 10-year plan can qualify for PSLF, but not for consolidation loans, so don't do that if you have consolidation loans. And also, if you pay under the standard plan for 10 years, you're going to have nothing left to forgive under PSLF. So if you're really sure about PSLF, kind of the best strategy you can do is pay as little as you can on these loans and get the most forgiven. So an IDR plan is the way to do that. For PSLF, qualifying employment means full-time, which is at least 30 hours a week, and you can do multiple part-time jobs to be able to get up to that 30 hours. Generally, you want to do 501c3 nonprofit or government work. Some non-501c3s can qualify, but it's an interesting test that the Department of Ed uses, and they oftentimes just deny people. So C3 is the safe bet, or government. You have to be hired and paid by a qualifying employer. So doing something like volunteer work isn't going to qualify. And this can also sometimes be an issue if you do like an outside funded fellowship and the host organization doesn't want to certify that you're an employer. So that's something to think about. And then since PSLF got started back in 2007, if you're an older borrower who's been making payments on your loans for a while, the important date here is what employment did you have after October 1st, 2007? And then you need to make these 120 months of payments, and they can be cumulative. So you're welcome to stop making payments if you need to, or go in and out of public service and private employment. Like, you might think it's just simple to make a payment that qualifies, but there's some things to think about. It has to be on time. A payment has to be due. It has to be in the right amount as required by your payment plan. And then this is definitely an issue that I've seen with some borrowers. You actually have to be in repayment status. So If you're in school or in your 6-month grace period or in a deferment or like a voluntary forbearance, that doesn't count for PSLF. What does count is we've all been in this COVID payment pause, 0% interest rate thing since March 13th, 2020. That does qualify. So this is sort of like a special forbearance period. And then again, those payments have to be made after October 1st, 2007. So like Suzanne said at the start, this is a real program. It does work. I think the last stats I saw were from March 2020 from the Department of Ed. And at that point, over 117,000 borrowers had had their loans forgiven that through PSLF and its associated programs, and that had discharged over $8 billion in debt. But it's not always easy, and that's what we're going to review today. It does take a strong dedication to 10 or more years of that full-time public service work. You have to follow the PSLF requirements, and you need to stay up to date with these new things like the PSLF Waiver and communications you're going to be getting from your servicer. You really need to keep strong records and do check-ins as much as you can take it to make sure everything's going all right. And then you may need to navigate a dispute with your servicer or sort of like escalate the issue to someone higher up if something does go wrong.
And I would just add here really briefly that just gear up for the next year or so. It's just, there's going to be a lot changing. We will talk about this. The current regime at the Department of Education, thankfully in the Federal Student Aid Division, is staffed up at present with like consumer protection advocates, people who were either in the advocacy space on behalf of borrowers or in legal aid, people who worked at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau previously and know about student loans. And they are on a mission to use every tool possible out of the executive branch to get as many people relief as possible through a number of means. There have been executive actions that have been publicized, including the PSLF waiver, which we'll talk about, creating new reconsideration and complaint handling processes. And also there will be some new federal regulations coming. They did convene a committee last year. I was on that committee. They will be updating regulations to clarify the eligibility requirements and application procedures for PSLF. We should be seeing proposed regulations sometime later this year, and that will also help inform how folks should be thinking about managing these loans. So it's complicated. Gear up, but just know that there are people at the Department of Education right now who are trying to make it easier to access PSLF. So this is the time to get your ducks in a row and get organized and follow the updates. And we'll talk a little bit more about the specifics later.
Yeah, perfect. And I think this also presents a good opportunity to, when these proposed regulations come out, comment on those regulations, those proposals, and really like make your experience heard and like what you're really desiring heard, and be able to kind of shape what changes are coming with PSLF and income-driven repayment and student loans. So it's a very exciting time. I think let's move on to sort of like the more hands-on, like where do you go, where do you find this information part of this workshop. A lot of people I talk to are not sure what types of loans they have or what repayment plan it's in, and just like, are they meeting the requirements of PSLF or not? So my best advice is always to go to studentaid.gov. This is the federal student aid website, and it's where all of your federal student loans are going to be and all of the information that you need about them. I have some screenshots here. If you're on your, if you're on your computer and want to follow along, feel free. This is a screenshot of my own federal student aid website. So I have blurred some things out here, but if you log in, you're going to see your name up at the top right. Click My Aid, and it's going to take you to a dashboard that shows you all of the loans that you have, just this top level information. How many loans do you have? What's the total balance? What's the interest? What was the original amount that you borrowed? If you scroll down, this is going to get broken out a little bit more into the different types that you have. So you can see I have a Graduate Plus loan, unsubsidized loan, and a Perkins loan, and it's showing how those fit into my total loan balance. There's a lot of steps to sort of get to individual loan information. So you're first going to click View Breakdown up in this My Aid dashboard. And that's going to take you to basically like, here are all the servicers you have and the different loans that you have. This is good if you're maybe not sure who your servicer is. This could be especially true with so many servicer transitions happening lately, but this is also a way to like get access to your servicer's website if you need to. Then if you click this view loans down arrow, you're going to be taken to a place where you can see all of your loans with more detail. And these aren't just like the types of loans that you have. These are individual loans that you borrowed each year that you were in school and borrowing loans. To get even more information, you click view loan details, and you're going to be taken to a separate page that's all about one loan that you have. So this is a particular loan that I borrowed. I'm going to see my balance, when I borrowed the loan, how much I've paid. Something new that just got added to the federal student aid website recently is your PSLF months are going to start showing up here now. I have not filled out any PSLF paperwork, so it says not applicable here. And this tool is so new that I don't know if it's updated yet. Suzanne, I don't know if you know about the implementation of this new tool at all, but this will be another good place to sort of like check how far along are you in your PSLF journey. And we'll talk about the PSLF form in a little bit, but every time you submit the PSLF form, this number gets updated. Suzanne, any updates about how this implementation is going?
It should be live by now,
Okay.
if not now shortly. I mean, for so much of this, you're just going to need to periodically check this student aid portal and your loan servicers portal, just because they're rolling out updates in batches, and there are 44 million accounts outstanding across the nation and almost 4 million here in California alone. So as you can imagine, there's a lot going on at once, but I believe that more of the PSLF specific help tools have been launched and should be live at this point, but if not now for some reason, then very shortly.
Great. So this is a place that, yeah, can you show us where we can see the number of PSLF months? So I'm going to go back. This is basically like I am in my aid dashboard. I'm clicking view breakdown on my loans. I'm clicking my federal servicer, the Department of Ed loans, view loans down arrow, taken to the table of all my individual loans, and I click view loan details. And then I'm taken to this page that has this information. So right at the bottom right of this top dashboard on each individual loan page is where you're going to see that number of PSLF months. If you've like never submitted the PSLF form except very recently, maybe nothing is here. You actually have to submit a PSLF form and have that be processed to get that information there. Here's another piece of this that I think is really helpful. If you click view loan status history under each loan, you'll be taken to a table that shows every loan status your loan has ever been in. So when I first borrowed the loan, I was in school. Then I had my 6-month grace period. Then I went into repayment for the first time. Then I did a voluntary forbearance and went back into repayment. And now I'm in this COVID forbearance, COVID payment pause period. Why this is so important is that you can only make payments that qualify for PSLF when you're in repayment. And also, someone just asked this, also during the COVID forbearance that started on May 13th. So if you like have Fed Loan Servicing as your servicer, they've counted up all of these payments that you've made, and now you can view everything by month, whether it's like an eligible or an ineligible payment. If you're seeing months where they're saying like no payment was due, like that type of information, you might want to compare that with this table and see, was I in repayment status and able to make a payment that qualifies for PSLF, or was I in a deferment or a forbearance? Okay, I'm going back to this dashboard of this individual loan. If I scroll down, I can also see the repayment details, like how much I've paid on this loan and when my payments are due. Here's a very important piece. What repayment plan are you in? Like I said before, income-driven repayment plans are sort of the best option for PSLF, and they definitely qualify. The standard repayment plan also qualifies, but not for consolidation loans. So that's something to look at. And then there's just this link here where you can go apply for a different repayment plan if you want to. There's also an IDR anniversary date. So if you are in income-driven repayment, there should be a date here, and that's basically the expiration date of your income-driven repayment plan. This can be very confusing right now because plans are only supposed to last 12 months and you renew your income every single year and get a new plan. This hasn't been happening since the COVID payment pause went into action. So a lot of people have never applied for IDR. They last recertified their income in like 2019 or 2020. That's fine. And when I just checked the federal student aid website last week, they said no one is going to have to recertify until March 2023 at the earliest. So if you see a date there that is earlier than that, you can expect that your plan will last for another year. If you see a date that's after that, that's probably when you're going to have to recertify unless the COVID payment pause gets extended again. So something to keep in mind. Suzanne, I don't know if you have any insight about this. I am mildly confused about if the anniversary date means the date that your plan ends or the date that you have to recertify. Certainly some confusion there for me. Do you have any clarification about what the anniversary versus recertification date means?
I believe it's supposed to be the recertification date. And yeah, and so the date that, is the next time you have to recertify your income so that they can adjust payments accordingly based on whether your income, went up or down or what have you. And anecdotally, I've heard from, certainly this was the case last fall, where recent graduates were about to enter repayment and they, were able to enroll in an IDR plan and know what the amount was going to be based on their income at the time. My understanding is that you can still do that now. So if you're about to enter into repayment this fall, you can still submit the paperwork to say, hey, I want to enroll in, revised pay as you earn, and here's my current income. And they will still process that. You just won't have to start paying it until we're back into the payment pause. And then, yeah, they're going to give for a little more time before you have to recertify again. So if you've already recertified a year or two ago, you can just kind of sit tight until March 2023. So if you're someone who's already enrolled in the plan and you want to stay there, you can stay there and don't have to do anything else. If you've just graduated and are about to enter into repayment, you don't have to certify now, but you certainly could, and might be a good idea to get paperwork in before the payment restart actually happens. But part of why they're pausing this a little bit is they're still in the middle of assigning people to servicers, including transferring people to new servicers as some of the current contractors exit the program. So it's a little bit, again, another area where it's a little confusing, but you certainly can go into student aid right now and assess your options.
Thank you for clarifying that. Okay, so that's kind of all I have to show you on your own account of your loans on studentaid.gov. So basically, after you do this review of your loans, there are a few action items you can take. Do you see that all of your loans are direct federal student loans, or are there any that you need to consolidate or want to consolidate? Are you seeing that your loans are in a qualifying repayment plan for PSLF, or should you apply for an income-driven repayment plan? And like Suzanne said, make sure your loans are set up for PSLF and set up for when that payment pause ends at the end of August. And then there's some other action items, like you could calendar your IDR recertification / anniversary date just to make sure that you know when that time is coming up and you take the appropriate action then. Again, you don't have to recertify during the COVID payment pause, so we're waiting until March 2023 or later. You can look at that PSLF tracker that's on there and kind of compare that with your own estimate. Is that number looking right or does it look wrong? You can compare that loan status history table I showed you where you're in repayment and not in repayment with a PSLF tracker on Fed Loan Servicing's website to make sure everything aligns there. And then if you do have private loans or you're not sure if you have private loans, you can find those on a credit report. And again, those are not eligible for PSLF, but if you're trying to do just like a full accounting of your student loans, that's where you might go. Okay, I think it's time to move on to talking about the PSLF form. So this used to be called the Employment Certification Form, but now it's just called the PSLF form. It's the official form that you will have to submit to document your employment and your payments for PSLF. If you don't submit it, they are going to have no idea that you qualify. Right now, it's recommended that you submit a new form every year, and then every time that you leave a job, because it's essentially a retroactive process where the Department of Ed is going to look at all of the payments and the employment that has already happened for you, counting of months that have already passed. So it makes sense to submit multiple forms for the same employer if you're working at an employer for more than 1 year. And it makes sense to submit a form every time you leave a job, because you're just capping off that time. You're finishing out the forms that you'll ever have to submit for this job, and you'll be done with it. I've gotten advice from people who have gotten PSLF that submitting the form more often than annually, the closer you get to 120 months, can be really helpful. And maybe Suzanne can chime in with her recommendations, but essentially, like, the closer you get to actually applying for PSLF, the more information you want to have about, have any errors occurred? Is there anything you need to correct? And when exactly are you going to be submitting your application? Suzanne, any other tips about this?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I don't know for sure. I mean, certainly if you suspect that there was maybe an error, an accounting error, and you want to resubmit to redocument, no, between this time period and this time period, I was at a certain employer, that might be useful. I mean, if you happen to be someone who is at the same employer year over year, submitting it annually is probably going to suffice at this point. It's really going to depend on the facts and circumstances. But yeah, if you think that there's been an error, they missed a couple months, then yeah, sure, resubmit that employment period to make sure that it's well documented, and keep all your own records as well in case you have, if you hit an issue and you have to file a complaint with your servicer or submit for the reconsideration process that the department has now set forward, then you would want to have all that documentation.
Perfect. Okay, how you submit this form is that you can do it on your own using a PDF, or you can use the PSLF help tool, which was introduced a couple of years ago, and that will generate a pre-filled form. So I think it's probably the easiest way to do things. And so to do it, again, you go to studentaid.gov/PSLF. You will be taken to a screen where you can start up the PSLF help tool process. Basically, you're going to start by adding employers that you have. You have to search by federal employer identification number. So generally you'd find this on like a W-2. That's where I found the University of California's employer identification number. If you don't have a W-2 yet, or you didn't save your W-2, contact an HR person, or sometimes if they're a big organization, that information can be on the internet. Then you're going to
I can also say from what happened to me is, and this can be a little confusing, particularly if you work at some state agency or department that is within the morass of some org tree. There is an employer identification number for my department, for DFPI, that kept getting rejected, and I had to resubmit under the state of California, like the state government as a whole. So if you're kind of in the middle of a bureaucracy at a local government or at a state government agency, you may just want to try the master EIN for the governmental entity that you work for, and that should work. But that was something that I even encountered myself when I did my finals form. I just want to share that anecdote.
Good tip. Okay, so you can try multiple things. You'll see on the next screen that this actually generates like an employer that you can select. So if you're not seeing anything, maybe give a different EIN a try. You want to indicate if this is your current employer and put your start date in. If this is a past employer, something that's just ended, you're going to put that end date in, and then you search. And so this is probably the screen Suzanne was talking about, what wasn't there. You can see that University of California is here. That means someone has filled out a PSLF form successfully who works at the University of California. So I'm selecting that. You fill out the employer's address. I would also just go with what's on the W-2, probably the safest bet here. And then you'll put in your details indicating if this is qualifying employment that's full-time, or if it's less than full-time, you're going to have to put in multiple employers, basically showing that you're getting up to that 30 hours a week. And then I'm indicating that this organization is still open, and I have someone here who can sign off on this form for me. once you do that, it's going to finally add this employer to your list of employers. You can see here that it says mine's eligible, which is great. So all that I'm really needing to get counted up are my payments made. I don't really need a determination of is my employer eligible. I've also heard, in addition to Suzanne's tip about like maybe changing up the EIN to something that's higher up, I've heard from some advocacy organizations that if you believe you're working in public service employment and it comes up with like I think they say like likely ineligible or something like that status, you could always just go back to the PDF version of the form, fill it out that way. If the help tool won't let you continue, and just submit it that way. In that way, the Department of Ed will evaluate that employer for PSLF. Okay, now we're getting to the part of like, are you applying for public service loan forgiveness or are you just certifying your payments? So if you were actually had 120 or more qualifying payments, you'd check that box and you'd be submitting your PSLF application. For me, I'm saying, no, I haven't made the payments. I just want to get them counted up. And then after you enter your personal information, it's going to generate this form for you. So I'm going to download this form. Then I need to sign the form. And there are some particular rules about what the signature, allowable signature type can be. So DocuSign, not going to work. Like a typed signature, not going to work. It has to be either a hand-drawn wet signature or like a hand-drawn like digital signature. So that's something to think about. And then you also need your employer to sign the form. The PSLF rules generally state that an authorized official is the person who can sign your form, and that's someone who's authorized to certify employment for your organization. So generally, that's probably an HR person who has access to these employer records. I've definitely seen people get their form signed by like a supervisor if maybe they don't have an HR department or they can't find them in some web of like a ginormous organization. So that could be an option. And then I've seen this a couple of times. What if the organization is closed? What if they refuse to sign your form for you for some reason? You can actually just check a box at the bottom of page 1 at the form that says you cannot obtain a signature. And Suzanne, maybe you can go into more detail about what this looks like if you know, but I believe the Department of Ed will actually just ask you for like alternative documentation about your employment. I don't know exactly what that looks like.
Yeah, I think that if you flag that you can't get that there is no one that you can get access to sign, there you can provide some alternative documentation of your employment, and that of course can cause some additional back and forth and delays, but they are trying to create more and more workarounds to make sure that people can self-certify their employment.
Perfect. Okay. Then this is just this is what the 2 pages look like that I have been pre-generated. Imagine I'm signing them and my employer is signing them. Now it's time to submit it. So if your loan servicer is Fed Loan Servicing, you can actually upload that right on their website. So that makes it easy. If your loan servicer is not Fed Loan Servicing, you either have to mail it or fax it, which is kind of old school. So definitely make sure you save a copy for your own records, just in general, but also like, what if it gets lost somewhere? So make sure to do that. And then I feel like we're getting a ton of questions about the PSLF form. So I want to make sure that we cover those before moving on to the next portion of this. But I do want to say, I've been getting a lot of intel from Suzanne about this. Like, it's taking possibly a couple months for the loan servicers for the Department of Ed and Fed Loan Servicing to review the PSLF forms right now, especially with so many people submitting forms for the PSLF waiver all at once. That's okay. You should eventually get a letter that says the form has been accepted, that they've made a determination about your employer and about your payments. And then also eventually you're going to have Fed Loan Servicing's website update with the number of payments that you've made.
You're going to see that studentaid.gov PSLF tracker get updated as well. Suzanne alluded to this, but Fed loan servicing is leaving federal student loan servicing. So they're not always going to be the one you submit your PSLF forms to. We need to just like make sure that whenever you submit your PSLF form, that you're following those instructions and saying, who are these people I actually need to submit the form to? And that means also that most people's loans are going to get transferred away from Fed loan servicing eventually. So just another reason to make sure you have a copy of all of this on your own. So Suzanne, I don't know if you have anything to add or if we should just kind of jump into some of these PSLF form questions before we move on.
I think we should get through the Q&A before we move on. Yeah.
Let me do the easy ones. You can mail in a paper copy. I would probably recommend digital if Fed loan servicing is your servicer, because it's going to be quicker and easier. But if not, paper copy is totally fine. Let's see. Clerking or working for a judge is definitely qualifying employment, assuming it's full-time, which I'm assuming it is, but that's generally state or federal employment. So that qualifies for PSLF. How long it's taking to process PSLF forms. This is interesting. So Suzanne, it says, someone received a letter confirming receipt of the form a few months later, but otherwise there's been no further communication. Is there a different length of time that they need between acknowledging receipt and actually updating your payment counts?
Yeah, I mean, if they've confirmed receipt, you've done what you needed to do. So start there. You know, I mean, in my experience, which was last summer, I got receipt confirmed, you know, after maybe a month or so, and then I had to wait another 3 months before I actually got a letter saying like, yes, you got PSLF. So once they've confirmed receipt, you don't need to do anything else, but it may take, you know, a few more months at minimum. And again, because there are a lot of moving parts right now, you know, they are working on batch processing and speeding things up. They've completed some of the loan servicing transfers for non-PSLF folks, kind of that they wanted to get out of the way first so they can really focus on PSLF borrowers who have the most paperwork associated with their loans. So in theory, they're getting better and better at speeding things up, but you know, a couple months, like 3-4 months is totally normal right now. So that's the best I can really say at this point in time.
That's answered. This is sort of an interesting one. Can you get PSLF credit from working at a university while earning a PhD? So universities are typically 501c3 nonprofits, so they qualify for PSLF. But if your loans are in school status because you're earning a PhD and like you're enrolled full-time as a student, and that's what your school is reporting to the Department of Education, then you can't get credit for PSLF. So Suzanne, I believe there is some form out there that's like a waiver of in-school deferment potentially, but my inclination is to say no.
Yeah, I mean, if you took out these loans as because I know at some places, you know, even PhD students have to take out loans, they don't get full stipends. So if a loan has been taken out, like it's a grad plus and you've taken it out to pursue your PhD, and the loan is associated with your PhD enrollment, it'll likely be put into in-school deferment. And if you're in-school deferment, that time is not going to count. So yeah, if you're in repayment and paying the loan in a repayment status, then it could count.
Okay. And then this is the last open question that I see right now. Someone's asking, when do you need to complete the PSLF forms by? We wait until we start our jobs in the fall? So I'm assuming this person is like a recent grad who is not started their employment yet. That means there's no need to submit a PSLF form because you are not currently employed by a qualifying employer. And in fact, you don't need to submit a PSLF form like right when you start working, because at that point you will not have made any payments toward PSLF. So while you could submit a form right once you start working in the fall, you actually can just wait until next year, a year into your job, and submit that PSLF form for the first time. There's truly no deadline on this PSLF form, other than if you're hoping to qualify for the PSLF waiver and you've never submitted a form before, you want to do it by October 31st. And does working for the UN count as qualifying employment?
So employment needs to be at employment needs to be at a 501c3 nonprofit, maybe some other tax exempt US organizations. It's all US based. So you need to be at a local, state, federal, or tribal government under the purview of the United States.
I think that means no. Okay, I'm going to move on. Feel free to keep typing your questions in the Q&A, but I'm going to move on to this next section, which is mostly about like where to find your records and which records to keep. So as Suzanne will tell you, documentation is key for public service loan forgiveness. I've heard many stories about loan servicers maybe misinterpreting your records, losing records from like old loan servicers that don't exist anymore, or just mismanaging records. So you really want to have your own records that show that you qualify for PSLF. So some really important things to keep are, if you're an income-driven repayment plan and you get a letter every 12 months saying what your monthly payment is and how long it lasts for, save that because that's showing what you're supposed to pay every month. Then you want to show what you actually paid every month. So like payment history details, a whole accounting of your loans and when you've made those payments. Things like the PSLF form that you've submitted and that some people have talked about, you know, like getting a letter back that says their form has been accepted, save that type of thing. And then any correspondence that you have with your loan servicer, like, you know, have you talked about your account, about how like the COVID forbearance qualifies for PSLF? Did they send you a letter about that? Save that. Did you contact them about missing PSLF payments and you're going through sort of a discussion with them about that? Save all of that as well. So where you can find this stuff is some of it is on the federal student aid website, but generally on your own loan servicer's website is where you're going to find like the most detailed information. So here's my loan servicer's website. If I go to account history, it's going to show me all the payments I've ever made, when it was, what did I pay. And so downloading and saving this at least every 12 months is really important. I think loan servicers are generally better about this now, but some of them like wouldn't show you records from over 12 months ago, which is why doing this annually is important. Like, what if these records just go into the archives somewhere? And then you can also, like most loan servicers have like an inbox or a messages tab. That's where you can find correspondence from your loan servicer or like an income-driven repayment plan letter. That's what you want to be saving. Now, we talked about Fed loan servicing, leaving the loan servicing business. I recently had a loan transfer from Navient to AidVantage, and now I can't log into Navient's website anymore, and that often happens. So like, if you're getting notices from Fed loan servicing and the Department of Education that your loans are about to be transferred to a different servicer, go into their website and download and screenshot and save everything that you can, because who knows if those records will all transfer over properly. And you kind of want to like assume that things will go badly so that you have all of this information on hand. This is what Fed Loan Servicing's website looks like. They do have a payment tracker that shows all of your loans and kind of how far to PSLF and temporary expanded PSLF, TE PSLF, that you are. What's really most useful, I think, is this eligible payments versus ineligible payments table. So eligible payments means that you were in repayment status and you made a payment and it could qualify for PSLF. Once you submit a PSLF form that documents that you were employed in PSLF qualifying employment for a particular period of time, the status will change to qualifying. They've determined this is a payment that qualifies for PSLF. For any month that could be qualifying, but you haven't submitted a PSLF form yet, it's an eligible payment, but the employment is not certified yet. So it's not considered a qualifying payment yet. So this sort of gets updated every time you submit a new PSLF form. And then in this ineligible payments tab, that's where you'll see things like no payment made this month, or no payment due, or not in repayment status. And that's where it's good to like go back and look at your own records. Did you actually make a payment and something's wrong here? Were you in repayment status and something didn't transfer over? And that's where you might actually need to like communicate with your loan servicer and get something fixed. Suzanne may have some thoughts about this. Like, I don't know how some people don't like spreadsheets and keeping track of things. I think it's useful to keep track of things on your own in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it's really detailed, maybe it's not detailed at all. But if you think you have 24 qualifying payments and Fed Loan Servicing says you only have 10, that's useful information because something is not right here and something needs to be corrected. So you could have your own spreadsheet where you keep this information. You might track things like when you made a payment and how far along are you. You might also keep track of what are your employers? When did you work for them? How many months is that? When did you submit that PSLF form? And did everything transfer over correctly, or is there something that you need to correct? And you might also track, like, not every time your loan servicer emails you, but maybe about something important, when you got a new IDR letter, or when you reached out to Fed Loan Servicing's escalated line and got a process of like an audit of your account started. This is helpful information, certainly, if you ever have to bring things up to Suzanne's office or to the Department of Ed. You want to know kind of the history of what's been going on. Suzanne, you want to answer a question from the chat live before we move on?
Yeah, so the waiver for PSLF, which makes it a little easier right now to get PSLF credit, that expires October 31st, and that's the one that came from the HEROES Act. So it's statutory authority that's temporary and will expire unless Congress does something, which I wouldn't count on it. So in terms of starting paperwork now, I mean, I would try to get the paperwork done. If you graduated in 2021, I don't know if you have any past periods where you otherwise didn't meet all the requirements for getting your payments to qualify. But I certainly would say get things in. If you get it in August, that's probably still soon enough. Of course, we don't know. I mean, right now, the payment restart, which again, that's set by the executive branch, that is set to happen after August 31st, although it could get moved again, quite frankly. So I would say, as your fellowship is ending, just get your paperwork done then before you separate from your employer so that you have what you need to document your past employment if you think your fellowship qualifies.
Yeah, I think Suzanne is right. The PSLF waiver mostly exists to help people that had all of these ineligible loan types or repayment plans in the earlier years of the program, like essentially when the guidance was bad and people didn't know what to do. Like, this is mostly a correction of that. So I think for really recent grads who only borrowed loans for law school, like, I don't think you need to worry about the October 31st deadline as much, because you've probably already done everything right. You have the right loans, they're in the right repayment plan, you've submitted those PSLF forms. There's really not much that needs correcting here. Okay, well, speaking of the PSLF waiver, here's just a quick rundown of it. Through October 31st of this year, really any period of repayment on your federal student loans is going to count toward PSLF if you are working full-time in public service qualifying employment, even if it was the wrong loan type, like a Perkins or a FFEL loan, even if it was in the wrong repayment plan, like perhaps a graduated plan or an extended plan, even if normally when you consolidate your loans, it sort of messes up the entire past timeline for PSLF, and your past payments can get erased. This fixes that problem. And then even if you made a partial payment, a late payment, or no payment at all. So this is really great, again, for those borrowers who maybe did something wrong in the past. What you need to do to qualify is before October 31st of this year, if any of those previous things, the things on the previous slide apply to you, you want to take action. So if you have never submitted a PSLF form, you're an older borrower, submit PSLF forms for all of your public service employment while you are in repayment after graduation since October 1st, 2007. Let's get all your employment get all your employment documented and all those past payments qualifying. If you have things like FEL or Perkins loans and you want them to qualify for PSLF, you should consolidate them also before October 31st. And then if you're not in an income-driven repayment plan, you were in an ineligible plan like a graduated or extended plan, you want to sign up for income-driven repayment before October 31st. Now, if all of your loans already qualify or you've already taken all of these steps under the PSLF waiver, great news, there's nothing else you need to do. The Department of Ed is reviewing everyone's accounts for eligibility for the waiver. I'm sure that some of you have gotten letters about that, you're eligible or that your payment count may increase by X amount if you take certain actions. So that's great. There may be some action you need to take if anything is not qualifying for PSLF already. Okay, I do want to point out that Suzanne was on a panel last month that I hosted specifically about the PSLF waiver, which is up on our website if you want to think about this for another hour. So lots of information there. That's why I won't spend too much time on that today. Someone in the Q&A asked, how long does it take for IDR plan approval? Submitted an application in late April and I'm still in the standard plan. I think that seems normal to me. I'm generally like a month or two. I'm certain that it will get approved before the waiver expires if you submitted it in late April. I would say keep holding on for maybe another month. And then you could always reach out to your loan servicer and ask them for an update if you're looking for that, just to make sure like you've gotten my application, you're processing it, any updates about how long this will possibly take. I'm reading a question. I've seen that a number of periods of forbearance where I was employed at a qualifying employer be credited, but some were not. These forbearances were because Fed loan servicing was slow in processing my IDR requests, so I only had the choice of a 2 to 3 month forbearance or paying non-IDR payments, which were 5 times my normal payment. Is there anything to be done here? I've been thinking about this question for a while, and I think Suzanne might have better advice, but I don't know if anything can be done, because technically if you weren't in repayment status, then you can't qualify for PSLF, but the only reason you weren't is because Fed loan servicing put you there.
So there's something else going on at the Department of Education that I think will help with this situation. They are outside, set aside PSLF for a minute. Generally speaking, with IDR, this is a systemic issue. It's happened to a lot of people. It happened to me, right? Where like I submitted my recertification, they said, we need a little more time. We're going to put you in an administrative forbearance. And then yes, that forbearance period typically means you're not making a payment, so that wouldn't be a qualifying payment. However, the department recently announced they're going to do a one-time audit of everyone on an IDR plan and give people credit toward IDR repayment forgiveness for those past periods where they were involuntarily put in forbearance. Now I'll go back and check with Department of Ed, but that may in turn fix the gaps in the credit toward PSLF.
Perfect. Okay, we only have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to blast through these last few sections. Essentially, submitting the PSLF application once you have 120 months of qualifying payments is basically the same thing as submitting the PSLF form. It's the exact same form. It's up to you're going to select that you qualify for forgiveness now. You have your current employer sign the form and you keep working in qualifying employment until that PSLF application is approved. And then like Suzanne said, someday you'll get a letter in the mail that says your loans are forgiven. You'll log on to your loan servicer's website and it'll say $0, which will be great.
I filed my taxes this year. They didn't ask me for anything. It was fine. So just trust me.
It's real. It's so exciting. You actually have an option when you apply for PSLF to continue to make payments on your loans or enter a forbearance. I've heard from like the other people who talk about PSLF on the internet that continuing to pay is safer. Like obviously, if for whatever reason you're not at 120 payments yet when you submit that form, if you keep paying, you're still making progress towards PSLF. And you do get a refund for any payments over 120 that you've made. If you can't or don't want to keep making payments, so you're absolutely certain that you've made 120 months and you qualify, you can choose a forbearance and stop paying. That's obviously not necessary right now because no payments are due, but this is something to think about for the future. And then let's spend like 5 minutes talking about what to do if something goes wrong. I think the most common thing that happens is that the number of qualifying payments is different than what you'd expect, or maybe it's different between loans, so clearly something is wrong there. So what I always recommend is like first escalate the issue with your servicer. They're the ones who can fix your account. So talk to a supervisor, bring it up to the servicer's escalated line or the servicer's ombudsperson, see if they can do an audit or if they know what's going on with this issue. You can always ask for the employee's name and ID number for your records if you do end up escalating this higher to someone else. Suzanne, I would like for you to explain the difference between the complaint and dispute process at federal student aid and why one might choose one over the other.
I mean, at this point, I think functionally they're ending up at the ombudsperson anyway. They may get triaged at federal student aid if you just do the straight complaint. I would go straight to the ombudsperson's office. The ombudsperson, her name's Bonnie Luttrell. I know her personally. She is a former CFPB employee and a consumer protection person, and she has a team of people that are reviewing complaints, inquiries from borrowers. And so that's the team of experts that you want to get your information to so that they can further assess the situation.
Perfect. So I think that's always an option if you're, I mean, you could wait until you get a resolution with your loan servicer. If it's taking a really long time or they don't resolve the issue to your liking, you can always bring it up to the federal student aid ombudsperson. If you are just looking for general advice about what to do, or especially if you have been in LRAP before, where we might have some of your old records, you can always come to our office. And Suzanne, I have compiled this list of sort of like regulators that you may bring this issue to, like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau or the Attorney General's office or the California Department of Financial Protection Innovation. Do you want to talk a little bit about like what these different offices can do and what communicating with them might resolve or like bring up in a larger sense?
Yeah, so the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is the federal agency tasked with protecting consumers in the financial marketplace, and they do oversee and enforce federal law against student loan servicers. They also have a publicly searchable database. If you go to consumerfinance.gov, their website, you file a complaint, that goes into a database that the public can search. So you're not only helping the agency understand what's going on and seeing if they can help you with your problem, but then it also kind of helps the public, which does research on, how many complaints are there against Navient in the state of California or in the state of Wisconsin, for example, can also just kind of be a helpful contribution to public education around where there are risks in the financial marketplace. The CFPB has a pretty quick but kind of automated complaint routing system. They'll send the complaint to the company. They'll tell them to respond to you within, I think, 10 business days and try to resolve it, but it's highly automated. I would say if you file with our state Department of Financial Protection and Innovation, human beings scour every single complaint that we get, and we write them either to our licensing program. We have a student loan licensing program. Those are people who are examiners and investigators who will actually talk to the company directly. Or if we think it's a clear violation of the law, we may refer to our enforcement attorneys who may open a case to try to resolve the issue. And so we also have concurrent enforcement jurisdiction with the Attorney General's office. So here in California, the California AG's office, they also investigate. They are primarily a law enforcement agency, so they'll definitely look at investigations over like vexing problems at the largest servicers. Where we can kind of come in and do something a little bit different is that because we are the licensing entity, we can sort of kind of spot earlier problems and try to kind of prevent legal violations if we get inquiries or complaints about confusion around the communications on PSLF Waiver or some of the other pieces. So I would say, I know it's a little bit annoying, but to the extent that you can take your complaint and file it with all three of the agencies, all the better, so that we're all tracking it. And because we also do meet regularly with our counterparts at other agencies to try to leverage our collective resources as government to try to fix systemic problems.
That's fantastic advice. And then there is this new request for PSLF reconsideration process that I think came about after a lawsuit. So this is sort of like a new formal reconsideration process if your PSLF application gets denied, or maybe if it's determined that some of your payments or your employment doesn't qualify. Suzanne, I recently talked with you about this. I don't think this is the best avenue right now, especially with the department reviewing all of these old PSLF applications anyway, and all of these accounts under the PSLF waiver. But I think it's something to watch and maybe utilize after the waiver period is over.
Yeah, the Department of Education recommends this one I think requires maybe a little more steps and more paperwork, but this one is, the team on the reconsideration process is largely looking at intake from folks who want to get reconsideration of their employment eligibility. So that's, if you have a general payment issue, maybe do the ombudsman route. But if you want to get reconsideration over, no, this employer was an eligible employer for PSLF, then you may want to consider using this reconsideration process.
Awesome. Okay. And then just lastly, there are so many places to go if you want to learn more about PSLF. The PSLF website on studentaid.gov is literally updated all of the time, and I see the information changing. So go there for FAQs. We have a web page. The California DFPI has a web page. Student Borrower Protection Center is awesome, and so is the PSLF Coalition. And then if you're hoping to like connect with other people going through this process, there's a few places you can go. These are just some of them, but I've heard good things about the PSLF support Facebook group. I think there's like 10,000 active members in that group. There's also a Reddit community. And there is a Lefty Berkeley Law alums Google group that you could request to join that I know is not all about PSLF, but I think some PSLF info is sometimes circulated there if you're hoping to connect with other alums who are in your same position. But that is all. I know it's after 2. I hope this was useful workshop and kind of figuring out what you need to do for PSLF and answering your questions. Here's some contact information if you'd like to get in touch with us or the DFPI. I'm going to put this recording up on our LRAP and financial aid website at Berkeley Law. It might take me a week, but I'm going to put the slides up there later this afternoon, so you can find that information if you want to rewatch or send it to people who didn't attend. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much, Suzanne, for lending all of your expertise here, and definitely reach out if you have any questions.